Hi everyone, and welcome to today's video lesson for art. So today we're going to be looking at observational drawing. So that's drawing from life or drawing from something that's in front of you, not from photographs. And for today's lesson we'll be developing our observational drawing skills by focusing on the things that surround us. And it's important for us to remember that all the best artists are able to draw. It's the starting point for everything we do, and it's a good thing for you to show off your drawing skills, as it's something we look for in your coursework and your personal projects. Now, it's not the easiest thing to do, and it will take a little bit of practice, so don't be discouraged if the first few attempts don't go so well. This is your time to prepare, so you will need some drawing materials. So you'll need a pencil, a HB or below. I prefer a 2B or a 4B. You're going to need some paper or a sketchbook, an eraser and a sharpener. You'll need a suitable space to work in, so make sure you've got plenty of space to draw. You should use a clear table or a hard surface with lots of room around you. So make sure you make plenty of space to work in. And you're going to need something to observe. So today I'd like you to look at maybe some landscapes. So this could be a view out your window from somewhere in your home, or it could be your back garden or a forest or in town, depending on the weather, obviously. Before we go any further, I want to look at today's task. And the task is to develop our observational drawing skills by creating a sketch based on our surroundings using a range of graphite techniques, which we will explore by looking at the work of other artists. There are two lesson objectives for today. Firstly, to develop our observational skills using line, shading, tone and expressive marks. And secondly, to critically analyse our outcomes and link them to our contextual research and exploration. That's a key part of your GCSE success criteria, and that's being able to link your work with the work of others. Remember that to successfully achieve these objectives, you must think carefully about how you approach your drawing. Make sure that you pay close attention to the demonstration and the success criteria. This information will be used in your annotation at the end. It's now time for us to look at some artists. I don't want you going off and drawing before we've actually looked at some of these different artists and how they approach it. Don't forget, you can pause here and you can get some paper ready to make some notes. The first artist we're going to look at is called Magdalena Kozowska. Now, her work, as you can see in the left-hand side of the screen, is very expressive and there's lots of lines and marks. And that's as much information as I'm going to give you. Your task is in the 2 minutes below, is to write down as many different things that you can see in her work. Now that could be the things she draws, the techniques she uses, and how she approaches the drawing in general. Your 2 minutes start now. Okay, so that's your time up. Now I'm going to tell you some of the things I noticed and see if they match up with your notes. Now don't forget, you can add these to your notes as well, and we'll be using this information later on. So firstly, I noticed lots of expressive marks. There were bold lines, especially around the windows and maybe around the guttering at the top of the building. There were a range of tones. You can see that there's lots of shadows towards the windows. There's shadows in the grass at the front, and that gives us a 3D effect. There's hatching and cross hatching, so that's using alternate ways of adding your lines. There's also perspective. You notice the buildings towards the back are a lot smaller because they're further away. There's graphite layering, especially at the front in the grass. You can see lots of different layers and lots of different marks to give you the idea that there's lots of different plants there. And this is a work in drawing. You can see some of the original sketches. You can see not everything's inside the lines, and they've not spent too much time rubbing out. They've just made sure they've worked over the top. So here's the second one. It's a little bit different. There's some things I noticed very different from the other one, and there's some things that are the same. Now, the same task as the first one, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to note down all the different things you can see. Your time starts now. Okay, so let's see some of the things I noted, and again, we'll see if they match up with yours. So firstly, this one's a lot more careful with the shading and tone. You can see it's much neater, and the way in which they've approached it really gives us a lot of different ranges. There's no outlines in this one really. There are a few bits of detail, as you can see in the roof, but there's no actual outline. And this is a good technique to use because we don't see outlines in anything we see. It's a case of building up the shading and tone to create the illusion of outlines. There's layered shading, especially in the boats at the front and the water, and that gives us that realistic effect. There's a range of mark making, and you can see this in the plants towards the back, especially in the water and in the roof lines. There's good use of highlights. You can see there's a big white wall on the one building, and that makes it stand out, and it gives us that illusion of depth. And there's perspective, especially if you look at the steps, and you can see how they get smaller as they move further away. There's also some thick, bold lines in the shading, and they're not outlines, but they've been used to sort of give the illustration that there are some different masts and things sticking out of the boats. So now we come on to what we need to do, and we're going to do something similar. This is an example I've done for you, and this is a view just over the valley locally where I live. Now I'd like you to make sure you've got a nice view out of one of your windows, as I said, or maybe from a door or your back garden. And using a graphite pencil, HB to 4B, you're going to create an observational drawing of the scene around you. This could be the view out your window, from your garden, or even your local area. What is important that you can see it clearly and you're able to draw from a comfortable position. And remember, this is a difficult thing to do and it's all about practice. This type of task is about improving your drawing skills, and the more you do, the better you will get at. Before we go any further, I'm going to show you a short video of where I created my own sketch. And you can use this as part of the success criteria and to get some ideas about how you lay out your drawing and how you add your shading and tone. To add to your success criteria, I've analysed my own drawing and I've pointed out some of the key features, so we'll go through those now. Firstly, I've used bold lines and expressive marks which suggest the leaves or the grass or the stone or the different textures that you can see. I've used less detail towards the background, which gives the illusion of distance and adds to the perspective. And I've used perspective in some of the roof lines and some of the roads and anything that really is going into the distance. And you can see this where the road gets smaller as it gets further away from us, and the buildings in the back are a lot smaller than the ones in the foreground. And I've also used shadows, which gives this illusion of depth. Now that comes from my layering as well. If you notice with the trees on the right hand side, I started to shade first and add in a little bit of shade in there and then worked over the top with the marks. And this will give us that illusion that things are a bit more real. So I've written out 3 different sets of success criteria for you. Firstly, you'll need to look at your accuracy. Think, have you worked slowly? Have I worked carefully and lightly to create an accurate outline of the subject? And have I made sure that I've looked closely at the scene I was drawing from? The depth and tone comes second. I've layered my pencil to create a range of tones from dark to light, making sure the shadows and the highlights are in the correct place. And mark making. I've used a range of marks to imitate the textures, so that's long soft strokes or scumbled marks or things to create leaves or rocks or walls or roofs, whatever you can think of. So I'm going to allow you to pause the video here. It's ready, steady, go. Pause the video and then come back when you've completed your drawing task. If you've clicked play now, I'm assuming that you've actually finished the task and we've got something to evaluate. Firstly, we'll go back to the lesson objectives. I want you to look at your work. Have you achieved lesson objective 1? Have you developed your observational drawing skills using line, shading, tones, and expressive marks? And then number 2, this is the bit we'll come on to now, is critically analysing our outcomes and linking them to that research we did before, linking them to the success criteria. There are some key points for your annotation, and your annotation is basically some writing explaining what you've done. And firstly, you need to remember this. Don't forget to write what you've actually created. What have you drawn and why? This is always a reason. There's always a reason you've created the work, even if it's just for practicing. Secondly, how did you create it? Think about the steps you took. What was the process? Once you had an outline, what did you do? What techniques did you use and why did you use them? And then it's about being a bit more critical about ourselves. So what was successful in your work? It's always important to point out what you've done well, especially when you're developing a project. This should link with a technique. So for example, I've added lots of different marks to create the idea of foliage. How can you improve? Don't be too critical, but be honest. Which areas were you least happy with and how can you improve them? Be specific. So I could say with mine, my background wasn't particularly good. Yes, it was blurry, it was in the distance, but I could have been far more careful with my shading and I could have taken my time to get all those different tones. This isn't about saying that my work is terrible, it's about finding points for me to improve. Here's an example of my annotation for my drawing. Here I've created an observational sketch which looks out over the valley near where I live. To do this, I started by looking very carefully at the scene and then lightly sketched the outline of the buildings, mountains and other features. I made sure that I used perspective so that the objects appeared smaller in the distance. When the outline was complete, I began to use a range of marks to add more detail. In the houses and stonework, I applied cross-hatching, and in the trees I experimented with scumbling and circular motions to give a leafy effect. For the background, I used less detail to make sure that it looked as if it was in the distance. Overall, I'm pleased with the outcome and I think I have been successful in using shading and tone to create depth. If I were to do this again, I would look more closely at the marks I was using and try to add a bigger range. I would also be more accurate when drawing the buildings, as some of the roof lines are not exactly as they were in the scene. You can see from this description that I've talked about what I've done, I've analysed it and explained the techniques I've used, and then I've found some successful elements and things that I could do to improve. And that's what I'd like to see in your annotation. This is just a simple layout with some prompts for you when you're writing about your work. So what did you do in the project and how did you do it? And there's a few different questions that can help you there. What do you think worked well in the project? And again, some questions to help you. And then finally, if you did this again, what would you change? Could you improve? Now you're going to go ahead and write your own annotation for your drawing.